Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to take a look at PySpark and how this interacts with AWS Glue to perform data manipulation and ETL tasks. We're going to look at this from a code and syntax perspective and all the methods that are available to us through PySpark and AWS Glue. To do this, we're going to use a Glue interactive session and a Glue notebook. Don't worry if you're brand new to AWS or Glue for that matter, I'm going to take you through every step. All the resources we need are free on my GitHub, link in the description. With that being said, I love making this content for free on YouTube, so I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe. With the intro now out of the way, let's jump onto the computer where we'll get up and running and run our first bit of PySpark code. Okay guys, the first thing you need to do is navigate to the GitHub link down below in the description, and we need to download this information or these files and data once you arrive. The simplest thing to do is just download them as a zip file. So right hand side code, download as zip, that will download into your documents. You then want to unzip that, so I can just double click at the bottom and you can see now that I have that completely unzipped file ready in my downloads. We'll need it again in a second, so just leave it there. Okay, back on the GitHub page, you can see that there's a readme.markdown file that I've put in all the instructions in. So what we'll do is we'll do the setup and then we'll take a look at the other things as we go. We'll be using this data section quite a lot. We have 3 data files. If you look into that folder that we just downloaded, we have a customers file, an orders file, and an employees file. They're all .csv. So just a quick look in there and you'll see you have orders, employees, and customers CSV files. This is a sample of the data that they contain, and it's really important when we get to the syntax level that we understand what these files look like. But on to the main tutorial for now. So the first thing we're going to do is spin up the resources we need using a CloudFormation template we just downloaded. Then we're going to move those folders into the S3 bucket that gets created, and then we're actually going to set up a Glue notebook that we can use with our Glue interactive session. So with that being said, let's jump on to the console of AWS. Okay, once on the AWS console, what we need to do is go to CloudFormation. So you can see here on the left-hand side, I have CloudFormation selected. That's because I've been using it all day, but you should just be able to type in CloudFormation at the top and click on it. Okay, we're in. I'm running my account as an admin user. You must be using a user that has permissions to run CloudFormation, create Glue, resources, create IAM policies, and create S3 buckets. Easiest if you're doing this at home, just use your root account like me. Then we want to go create stack. We want to say the template is ready, and we want to upload a template. What we're going to do is upload that YAML file that was part of the Git repository, which is now sitting locally on our computer. So mine's is sitting in my downloads. So I just want to go choose file, downloads, into the unzip folder, and then click that YAML and hit open. I then want to hit next. We have to give the stack a name. So I'm just going to call this tutorial, PySpark Glue stack. Now, really important, we have to prefix the role in the script that I have wrote, so we need to give it a name. I'm going to call this, so I know, Johnny Chivers PySpark tutorial. Okay, the next thing we have to do is name the S3 bucket. The S3 bucket has to be unique within the entirety of AWS. I'm giving my name at the start. You should probably change this to your name. As I said, we can't have the same bucket. So if everyone's doing the lesson and they use the same name as me, then AWS will not allow that. So what we want to do is call this Johnny Chivers. The other thing I should point out is that I'm operating in the North Virginia region. I advise you to do the same. And let me just check where my VPN is currently located. Yeah, I'm in United Kingdom, but I'm operating in the North Virginia region. This definitely all works in North Virginia, so I advise you to stick with it. And just a final reminder, you need to call your bucket something unique yourself. So hit next. All this doesn't matter, so we hit next. As I said, I'm running this out of default with my own permissions that I have CloudFormation with. Create stack. This will take about 3 minutes to run in total, and we'll have a series of resources. I'll pause the video here, and then we'll pick it up once the stack has completed successfully. You just want to keep hitting this little refresh icon on the right hand side, and eventually you'll see that it goes create complete on the left hand side, which is green, and you can do that by hitting this refresh icon. You can also see that we've ended up with a series of green create completes here as well. If you go to resources, you'll see that we've created a number of things. We've created a table called customers. We've created another one called customers write DFY. We've created another one, or a database rather, called PySpark tutorial database. You'll see that we have employees table as well. I mean, you can read this here off the right hand side what they are. We have a role down here that we've created. We have another table called orders, and we have a bucket as well. This was created through the CloudFormation template. Don't worry too much about this. I will loosely explain what they are on the way, but it's not critical for this entire lesson to understand what's just happened. However, what we do need to do, and what is critical, is we need to navigate to S3, and we need to go to the bucket that we've just created that we just saw the name. So I'm going to go find mine by typing in PySpark, and you can see there that it comes up straight away. What we need to do is actually upload a series of objects by clicking upload. And then the easiest way to do this is to minimize this window because we need the folder structure here. I'm looking on the left hand side at my downloads where I unzip the folder. There's 3 CSV files in those folders that we need. So you want to take those folders, we want to keep the folders, and we want to keep the files. And we can do that just by right hand clicking and dragging. You can then see that we have folders customers, employees, and orders. And then we have the 3 files as well on the left hand side corresponding. You want to hit upload, and that's everything we need to do. So I can blow that window up big again. That'll run, it'll take a few seconds. You can see that it's successful. Click the link destination on the left. You can see we have the 3 folders. If we just click in, you can see we have customers, we have employees with an employees CSV, and we have orders with an orders CSV as well. Okay, the next thing we want to do then is actually go and create a notebook server that we can use the Glue interactive session on. To do that, what we do is we go up to the top left and we type in Glue. So I'm typing in Glue and click Glue. Down the left hand side, and because this is a brand new feature, you can see there's interactive sessions and notebooks. Click on notebooks and it'll load up a notebook server. Give it a name, so I'm just going to call this PySpark tutorial. You can call it anything you want, but if you want to call it the same as me, feel free. rule, we need to find the one that we just created. So I'm typing in PySpark because I named it PySpark. It's the name that you typed into the CloudFormation template 2 minutes ago. Click on that and hit Start Notebook Job. This will take about anywhere between 5 seconds and about 2 minutes, depending on how fresh the last notebook was. You can see for me here, it's already spinning up. So I'm just going to pause the video and it'll take about 3 or 4 more seconds and then mine should be ready. But don't worry if it takes a minute or 2, it will get created eventually. Okay, that's my notebook created. Took about 20 seconds for me. As I said, could take longer or could take shorter for yourself. These are some session things to actually use with the notebook. We don't have to worry about this right now. They're not really important to us. Anything we need to do, I'll touch as we go. What is important though is this block of code. This is how we initiate the Glue interactive session. And you can see here that there's a couple of things going on. Don't worry, the next part of the presentation, I'm going to explain exactly what this is doing, but I want to get us up and running first, and then I'll explain the theory. So the first thing to do, if you've never been into a notebook before, to execute a block of code, you click into it, so it's blue highlighted around, as you can clearly see, and you want to hit that play button. It's going to run off and do a few things for us, and you can see that there's a new empty block created down below. This new empty block, this is the only time we're really going to copy and paste some code in this lesson, and it's just to get us up and running. And again, don't worry, I'm going to explain exactly what this code is doing. So if you jump back onto the GitHub for 2 seconds, and you want to scroll down into the main tutorial, then we're looking for this number 4 block of code. You want to copy the code, so you can do right hand side copy, and again, don't worry, I'm going to explain exactly what this code is doing, and as I said, the rest of it we'll type out from scratch so we know what's going on. But for this part, copying and pasting is best. You can see that the session is getting ready to start, and then you can see that the session has been created. So once that's done, paste in that piece of code. You can see what we're about to do. We're about to read up some data from those tables and files that we just created through CloudFormation and uploaded into S3, and then we're going to show it. Don't worry if it doesn't make any sense yet. I'm going to explain everything. So what you want to do again is make sure the box is highlighted in blue, and hit run. This will take about 10 seconds. It's going to reach down onto that S3 bucket where we put those files. It's going to reach into the customer one and it's going to load data up for us in Spark and then print it out to our screen. So there you go. There's your first bit of PySpark code up and running. But what we need to do is understand what this code just done, and then we're going to take a look at all the different transformations that we can do with PySpark. So let's jump on and have a look at a presentation that I've created on PySpark and Spark that needs to know for Glue. This code will then make sense, and then we can start typing out the different pieces of code, looking at the different methods that we can use with Glue and PySpark. Okay, so what just happened? Well, we had a notebook on our local machine, so in this case it was my MacBook. We sent that down into AWS Glue. That ran on a clustered distributed computing system that was abstracted away from us. That was a Spark engine at heart. It processed the information and then it printed out back to the screen the results that we saw at the end. So that end result got printed back out into our notebook. So that's what happened at a high level. Now, just a word to understand, this is a Glue interactive session. So this is a new feature from AWS, and basically it makes it easier to actually prepare and build scripts in a development environment because it's giving us that real-time feedback between coding, hitting play, sending down and getting it back. The important thing to remember about Glue is that it's completely serverless, so AWS are looking after it for us, and that's why this works in terms of a tutorial. This is more about the PySpark side of things, so if you want to know more about Glue, I've left a link in the description down below that goes to the Glue tutorial that I've already done, and it covers the Glue service in depth, albeit before interactive sessions were a thing. The fundamentals of Spark for Glue. So the important thing to remember, Glue is just an abstracted cluster which was running Spark engine. So all our code is being executed on Spark. And Apache Spark is an open source in-memory distributed processing system used for big data workloads. I'm sure you maybe know this and that's why you're on this tutorial, but there's a couple of important things to take out of this. In memory, so we're always using RAM, so it's actually the RAM on the nodes or the servers that we're using. And the other part is that it's distributed, so our data or processing is across several different nodes. So I've drew out 4 nodes down the bottom here to represent that. Just remember that we're doing it in memory and RAM across multiple computers, and that's why PySpark is so powerful for Glue. Okay. Next little bit before we look at the code, and the reason I'm showing you this is because we'll actually see how the code relates to the point where we enter the program. So with cluster computing, we have a master node. That's our main node that kind of like drives the other nodes. It's called our master node. And again, don't worry if this is going slightly over your head. There's just a couple of key things to take away, and there are plenty other Spark tutorials on the internet and theory lessons that you can Google or YouTube, and they'll go into real depth on how this all works. But let's just look at the things we need to know to do PySpark here today. That creates a driver program, and here's the important part. That driver program has a Spark context. The Spark context is the entry point for the application, or in our case, code that we're writing. So that's where our code goes into the cluster. Now, remember that as we go along. There's then a cluster manager, which is called a yarn, and basically it negotiates resources that it needs. So our code comes in here at the Spark context as its entry point, works out how it's going to be executed. The cluster manager then grabs the different resources and containers it needs to execute our code. Our code gets executed and then it gets passed back up to us as a result. But the important point here is Spark context. Now, if you look at the code, if you have your notebook open on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see that we actually create the Spark context. So this is the entry point for the program. We actually called out in the code, and that's why it was already created for us when we went into the notebook. We didn't create this. AWS already had it ready to go. So every Glue script you create, this has to be here. You have to create a Spark context. But the other thing it actually needs is a Glue context. And this is where there's a slight difference between using Spark in an open source environment outside of AWS Glue and running it with AWS Glue. The Glue context is a wrapper for the Spark context to provide access to Glue methods. So Spark context is still our entry point, but we've wrapped it in this Glue context, and that means that we can use these Glue methods. And that's what we're going to take a look at today. We're going to take a look at the Glue methods that we can use with PySpark, and we're going to look at some of the pure PySpark methods as well. So we're going to start with the Glue methods, and then we're going to look at the PySpark methods, and we're going to see how these two things in tandem we can use to make really cool and powerful ETL code. So let's look at it all in full. Now, the first piece of actual Glue context or the Glue methods that we're going to look at is creating a dynamic frame. What is a dynamic frame? So a dynamic frame is a component that AWS Glue gives us to actually work with PySpark, and it makes it easier to read up the data, and it also gives us a series of methods that we can clean the data with when using Spark. So it's an AWS library that creates a frame over the data, and then we can actually use that frame to do different things like data cleansing. Dynamic frame, glue context, what's all that? You've already created it. So if we go back onto the notebook and take a quick look, this is a dynamic frame. You've already created it. So you can see that we're using the customers table. And what I also said was really important was to have this Glue notebook open, or the Glue README rather, at all points. If we go back up to data, you can see that there's customers. There's 4 fields. There's customer ID, first name, last name, and full name. And what the Glue dynamic frame does is you can see it reads up the customer ID as a key pair. The first name is a key pair, the last name as a key pair, and the full name as the key pair as well. Full name and then the value. This is known as a dynamic record, and this is known as a dynamic frame when we have many records together. AWS then give us, if I jump back onto the presentation, AWS then give us numerous methods to use with a dynamic frame. Okay, that's great, but how did the data get there? You said we could read the data, and obviously our code is reading the data. How do you read it up? So the dynamic frame has different methods. The one we're using is from catalog, but there are different ways to read up data. You can read up data using an RDD, which is a resilient data frame. This is a Spark thing. You don't really use it in Glue, so I'm not covering it, but there's plenty of lessons on it on the internet. You can read it up using JDBC, which is just a connection string. You can read it up using S3, or you can read it up using the Glue data catalog. If you look down the bottom of the presentation, and I'll leave slides that you can go, a link to the slides rather, that you can go and download, you'll see how all those different methods work. But today we're using the from catalog method for the Glue data catalog, as that's the one I encountered the most. I'm not going to cover how the data catalog works. Again, look at that Glue tutorial if you're interested. But you may be saying, but how did those data catalog things get created? How did that all happen? That happened inside the CloudFormation template. Now, if we go back onto AWS and we type in Glue, and I'm going to open this up in a separate tab, and we want to go down the left-hand side to databases under data catalog, you'll see that a database was created for this tutorial using the CloudFormation template. Click on tables in the database, and you'll see that we have 4 tables created, including the customer one. We uploaded the data for these 3 tables when we did the S3. If you click in customers, you'll see that there's a link out to an S3 bucket. I'm going to open this in a new tab again. Then looking at this data, you'll see that there's a CSV. If we look back on the Glue Studio, and if we go down and have a look at the from catalog method, you'll see that it's lifting from a database called PySpark, which is where we were in the Glue data catalog. So we're inside the PySpark database, and it's lifting by name a table called customers. And again, if we look here, there's a name called customers. So by supplying the database and the name of the table, we're able to use the Glue dynamic data frame library and the from catalog method, to lift the data we have sitting in S3. This is called an external table. Again, look at the Glue tutorial if you want to do more. This is about actually how we write the code to get the data up. So you can see we're using a method called from catalog. We supply the database and the table name from the Glue data catalog, and Bob's your uncle, we have a data frame or dynamic frame with dynamic records that we can use. So that's why I wanted to copy and paste that piece of code, because we now understand what it's doing. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is look at a couple of methods that we can use using the dynamic frame. I'm just going to load up on a separate tab here the DynamicFrame documentation before we jump in. As you can see, it's actually at the bottom of the slides as well. You want to load up the slide back under Glue DynamicFrame, and then down the bottom that HTML. Okay, so I've just copied that link from the first DynamicFrame slide, and you can see down the right hand side there's a load of methods that we can do with the Glue dynamic frame in PySpark. So we can run these methods and do things with our data, and that's what the rest of this tutorial is about. All the methods are listed out on the GitHub page, so again, make sure you have this open as we go. We're going to run through everything in the main tutorial now from 5 right through. We're going to cover DynamicFrame first and the methods we can use with that, and then we're going to take a look at actually using a Spark DataFrame to do the rest of the data manipulation and cleansing methods with AWS Glue. Okay, with that being said, I advise you to have this open beside you so you can scroll down. We will type this out as we go. I'll explain certain things, what we're doing as we go as well. So have this open on a separate screen so you can see it or side by side. And then let's jump back onto the notebook where we can start looking at the different methods and PySpark methods that we can do. Okay, so back on the notebook, you can see that everything's still here where we're just looking at that dynamic frame with the dynamic records. Next thing we want to do is look at a method called PrintSchema. So there's many times that we'll just want to see the schema without printing the data. This is really useful if you're working with data that you've not saw before or a different analyst has gave you. If you're new to Python and PySpark, a hashtag or a pound symbol if you're in the US is what we use for commenting. So it's really important to comment your code on what we're doing. So I just want to print schema. Again, this is shortened down from what's inside the README, but if you want to copy and paste it in, feel free as well. This will all work. Then we want to print schema. Now, because we're working in memory here on a Glue interactive session, we're just going to use the same dynamic frame because it's still there and we've executed this box. So we just want that dynamic frame customers, which I'm going to copy from above so it's spelled correctly. So it's dynamic frame customers. And then we just want to hit period symbol, which is then for a method. Then you want to type in print in small, schema with a capital S, C-H-E-M-A, and then they want to open and close brackets. So that's a method, and we're saying print the schema of this data frame, which is print the schema of this data frame above. Again, click into the box, make sure you're surrounded by blue, and hit run. What we'll do is go get that dynamic data frame, find the schema for us, and print it out. So you can see then that it knows that there's 4 things in there. Customer ID is long, first name is string, last name is string, full name is string. Again, if we just take a quick look at the data tables, which is up here, you can see that we have long, which is numbers for customer ID and customers, first name, which is all strings, last name and full name. Again, just a reminder, this is 3 rows of that entire data set. There's a lot more in it. I'm just showing you sample data. So that checks out, schema is correct. Oh, in case you're wondering as well, when I created the CloudFormation tables for Glue, all this has to become small letters. I've left it large so it's easier to read here. It's in the names of the columns. So everything's tiny letters, which is why it's all tiny letters on the schema. Before someone says, oh, but you have small letters there and large letters on the GitHub, it's just a nuance where all the letters have to be small for the data catalog and Spark. So I made them small when I did the template. Okay, excellent. That's how we print schema. So that's a great one. Another thing you might want to know is how many rows are in the dynamic frame itself. So we want to do a count in that instance. You may be familiar with SQL where you would write something like select, select, oh, can't even spell, select, count. And let's say we just wanted to know the count of everything, which would be star. And then you would say from table customers. That's how you would do it in SQL. Okay, that's not quite how we do it inside PySpark, but it's the same sort of logic. So again, we just want to count the dynamic frame. Again, always good to comment with your hashtag. And this time you want to take the dynamic frame, which I still have copied and pasted. So it's called DynamicFrame Customers, which is up here, the one that we already created. And you just want to hit the period symbol again, or the dot. And then this time there's a count method. So that's the same as count star in SQL. And then you just want to hit run. So it'll run off in the background, take our code, put it on the cluster. Our data's in memory across many different nodes, and it'll count that for us. And you can see that there's 365 rows in the customer file that we've uploaded in the CSV, or customer table if you want to think about it in terms of the Glue catalog. Another thing you might want to do is just select fields from the table or from the file. So you can see that we've loads of different fields here, but you might only want a couple of them. So in this example, as I look off to my left, we may only want customer ID and full name. We might not want the first name and the last name. So again, just like you would do with SQL, you can write a statement that basically says, give me the customer ID field here and give me the full name field here. So I don't want these two fields. I just want this field and that field. Now, the important thing that we need to do is we're going to assign it to a variable so we can actually see it at the end. We can do it in one line, but I'm going to do this in 2 lines just to show you, and then I'll show you how it's done in 1 line. In the documentation I provided, I do it in 2 lines, but there's a way to do it in 1 line. So the first thing I want to do is get a name for the data I'm about to create. So I'm just going to call this df. Again, I'm shorthanding this compared to the document because we're typing live. So dyf, and then I'm just going to call this select customers. Again, you can copy and paste this in. Forgot to actually put a comment, so I'm just going to put a comment in as well saying selecting customer ID and full name. Full name from Dynamic DataFrame. So what we do again is you want to take the data frame itself, which is here by name, and this time we hit the period symbol, and again good old AWS have gave us a method called select fields. So if you look into the documentation, if you have it open, there's a select fields method, and we're going to type the code for this select fields method. Now to do that, it is select underscore fields, F-I-E-L-D-E-S. Make sure you spell this correct as well. You can go around in circles at times if you haven't. Then you want to put a method in again, so it's the 2 curly brackets. Take a left back in, and you need to put in an array of columns that we need as strings. So an array of columns. So the first thing we need then is customer ID, and that's all one. Then we need a string, and again, I put my 2 quotes in and then go back, and we want full name. Full name. So again, there we go. It's an array, so square brackets, then 2 strings on the inside, customer and full name separated by a comma, and we've got a method called select fields. Then we want to hit play or run, and that'll go off and run. Make sure you're on it and hit, but nothing printed out this time. That's because there's a method, if we look at the documentation for our dynamic frame, called show. And we need to call this method show in order to see the data. So I'm just going to take another line in here, and I'm going to say show the results. Show the results. Again, all in the booklet. And we want to see the top 20, or we just want to show this top 10 here of this. So we can put show the number of rows we want to see, which is the top 10, and this time it will actually print it out to screen for us. So let's print that. Now it's off running that, and then it's showing us the top 10 results. No order to this, by the way, it's just the first 10 it comes to. And again, you can see that we've got customer ID and full name. Now I did mention that you can do this in 1 line, so let's do this in 1 line. Let's copy everything from the right hand side of that equals sign. Let's just say this time we are selecting can't spell, selecting and showing in 1 line. Hard to look at the camera and type at the same time. Paste it in, make sure that there's no space after you paste, hit dot and hit show. So this time we're calling 2 methods in 1 go. We're selecting the fields and then we're showing the fields. Again, make sure the box is blue and hit the play button. This is off running, and in 1 go, we're selecting customer ID and full name, and then we are showing it. Another thing you can do with a dynamic frame rather than selecting the fields is dropping fields. It's effectively the same thing almost, but just a different piece of syntax. So if you look into the documentation on the right hand side, I have it, there's a drop fields method. We're going to carry this out now in Glue Studio. Okay, in the documentation, I'll just load this up quickly to show you. I have done a lot of 2-line sign to the variable and then show, including for drop here, as you can see. From now on, I'm just going to do this in 1 line because I've showed you, but it's good practice if you're learning and you want to understand that you can assign it to a variable and then show, or alternatively, we'll just do this in 1 line going forward so it's quicker for us to type out, because there's no point writing a separate line for show all the time. Okay, so this time we're going to drop fields from fields fields from dynamic DataFrame. Never get my typing correct for dynamic, which is a bit of a pain. DynamicFrame. So again, we need that customer's DataFrame name. So I'm just going to copy. I know I pasted it there, but we use this quite a lot, so it's easy to have that in your clipboard and just paste it out. So we're using that customer's DataFrame again, and this time we're going to drop rather than select. So it's a period, then it's drop fields, and again 2 curly brackets like that. Then it wants an array again of the fields that we want to drop. So this time we want to drop first name, we want to drop last name. So it's going to give us the same result. Oh, that's wrong. We need to put that inside as a string, so it's like that. So again, you can see that we have an array of the column names as strings, so first name and last name, that we want to drop. And again, just to show you, if we scroll back out onto GitHub and we look at customers, we're literally dropping these 2 columns to leave customer ID and full name. So back here, and you guessed it again, hit play, and oops, look, forgot to hit .show. So we need that extra method of .show, like so, and then hit play again. And this time you can see that it'll print out the results as we had them above, but we're dropping fields rather than selecting them. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is rename the columns, and famous last words in the one before with the drop columns, although I did it in 1 line, I actually need to do it in 2 lines, because if you look here, I assign the drop fields to a variable, and then you'll see in the next example we're about to do, I use that variable of the drop fields. So classic me, do it in 1 line, but actually need it in 2. So the easiest thing to do is just copy number 8 and go back on to where we were, drop fields, delete out what we have and paste back in, and then hit run. If you've done it in 2 lines, then it doesn't actually matter and you follow the document. We're about to use this variable here, and that's why it's really, really important. So this will take a little second to run, and then I'll be ready to go again. Okay, that's just ready to go. So as I mentioned, the next thing we're going to do is remap the name, or change the name of a field inside the dynamic data frame. So this is really useful if you want to rename columns and then write them down to a different table. If you ever use Glue and you do something automatic in it in Glue Studio, like the 2-node thing where you're saying take full name and change it to name, this is the actual code it produces for you in behind the scenes, or something very similar. So again, we're going to write a comment, and we're just going to say mapping full name, which is that column or field we can see right here, to name. Now, if I look on the documentation for a little second, and it's applied mapping we're looking for here, you can see there's a couple of arguments that it needs. We don't have to insert all these arguments. Some of them are optional. So I'm just going to do the bare minimum to show you how to get going. So the first thing we need to do is write the mapping itself. So the mapping is a variable that I like to write separately, and this actually shows what fields we're mapping. So again, what we're doing here is we have customer ID and we have full name, and we're literally changing that name to name. You can also change the data type here, but we're not doing that. So the first thing we need is the mapping itself. So I'm going to need a variable called mapping, and we set that equal to an array of mappings. Now the mappings themselves then go inside curly or circle brackets. So the first thing I'm going to do is load up a circle bracket. Now this accepts 4 strings, believe it or not. We need to type in the name of the original column and the data type, then the name of the new column and the data type as well. So the first thing we're doing is customer ID. So it's a string called customer ID. And if you remember previously, we already know because we printed the schema, this is a long. So we know it's a long, I'm going to keep it a long. The next thing we need to do is what we want to call it in the new dynamic data frame. We're not changing anything, so it's exactly the same output. So the new dynamic data frame will also call this customer ID, and it will also have the type long. Again, all as strings. Oh, I've got a little typo there. Sorry. If we just go back, I'm missing a quote there. So old dynamic frame, it's customer ID, and type long. New dynamic frame that we're about to create with the new mappings, we want to call it customer ID again, which is this, and then it will also still have the type long. Okay, this is where the change comes in. So in between the curly bracket and the square bracket, we need to put a comma, and we need to do the mapping for full name. So again, two sets of brackets, and then this time it's called full name, and we know that the type is string because we've already printed the schema above. Then we want to change it this time. So the new name, or the target name we're aiming for, we're just going to call name. And then what we want to do is still keep that as type string. So we just put in the two quotes and we put in string. So as you can see, this is the original called name. This is what we want to change it to, or full name rather, and we want to change it to name, and we keep the two types as string. So that's the mapping itself. And now we need to actually apply that mapping. So on another line, I'm going to call this apply mapping to DynamicFrame. You can just put DYF for short. That's quite common. I want to assign this to a new variable. So I'm going to call this DYF. Again, quite common to call your DynamicFrame DYF. And we're going to call it mapping. Now, this is equal to the apply mapping function. So we have apply mapping. So apply with a capital A, mapping with a capital M, dot apply. Then we want a set of curly brackets, and I take a big bit of space between this. This will not be the neatest code, but it's easy to see what's going on. So I've got my curly brackets to open and close my method. First thing we need to type in is an argument called frame, and this is the data frame that we want to apply the mapping to. So the data frame is the one that we've just created called DYF customers drop fields. So that's the data frame we want to apply the mapping to. The next thing we need to do then is another argument called mapping. So we just want to take a new line. We want to put it in a comma, then take a new line. That comma is so important. And then put in mappings. So it's a mappings, and we've already put it up here called mapping. So we're taking the customer drop fields dynamic frame, which is here. We're applying this mapping to it. So we're saying change the full name to name. So change this full name to name inside this dynamic record. The last thing we want to do is just give this a little name. So you have to put in transformation. And again, sorry, there's a comma there, so don't forget that comma. And again, take that back. Transformation CTX. And then I'm just going to call this apply mapping 1. Just going to take rid of that space and hit a couple of enters so I have something to work with in terms of free space. Now, just to run through that again, what we're doing, we're taking this dynamic frame up above called DYF customers drop fields, which is here. We're saying we want to change the full name to name, as in the actual name, which is what this mapping is doing. So it's saying keep customer ID, keep it along and along. But what it's saying is take full name, change it to name, but keep both of them strings. So that's what we had originally, and that's what we want on the output. Okay, the next thing we want to do is just show the new dynamic frame. So I'm just going to put in another hashtag, show DYF. And then you just want to take the name of this dynamic frame, and you want to copy and paste, and then we want to hit show. So that's our new dynamic frame where we have renamed full name to name. Once that's ready to go, you just want to hit the little play icon up the top right, or run, whatever way you think of it. This will take a few seconds, and you can see that we've changed that to name. So you can see that we've changed full name to name. And that's how you rename columns using PySpark with AWS Glue inside a dynamic frame. Okay, the next thing you might want to do, and again, we'll just jump back onto the booklet quickly here, is you may want to filter data. So on point 10, it shows you how we're going to filter data inside a dynamic frame. In this example, as you can see, I'm just going to copy and paste this in so we have it, is that we're trying to only find customers in that customer dynamic data frame that have the last name Adams. So this is just a sample, but basically we're going to go down the last name here and we're going to find Adams. So that's the top 3 rows. Adams is obviously after that. So going to go down this dynamic data frame and find Adams. So I just copied that comment because it's easier than me typing it out all the time. Now, to do this, there's a couple of methods we can use inbuilt. So the first thing we need to do is create a variable so we have it ready. So DYF filter, so it's easy to remember, equals. Now, if we look back into the dynamic frame class, you'll see that there is a filter method called filter. It accepts f, which is a function, and that's the bit that does the filtering. This is a wee bit of Python code that you may not be familiar with if you're not really familiar with Python. I actually think filtering using a Spark data frame is easier, so I'm going to show you that later on in the tutorial how I actually do the filtering, but it's good to know this as well. So using that, we need a filter method. So capital L for filter. Then you want to put in dot apply. So dot apply. Again, 2 sets of curly brackets, and I'm just going to enter a load of space again so I know exactly what I am doing as I go. The first thing you need is an argument called frame again. So we type in frame, we hit equals, and this time we're going to put in the full dynamic customer frame. So if you remember the thing we created in the first instance, which for me is here, dynamic frame customers, I'm going to copy and paste that in. So it's the full customer dynamic frame, and we're going to use that. Don't forget your comma because we're just separating out method arguments here. And then what we need to do is type in f. So f stands for function, and we need to give it a function. Now this function is a bit hard to understand if you're not familiar with Python, but what it actually does is it's going to run along, and I'm going to load up the table just to show you. It's going to run along last name, one dynamic record at a time, so one line at a time, and say, are you Adams? Yes or no. If the answer is no, it's going to discard it. If the last name is Adams, it's going to keep it. So we're going through all the records in a loop and saying, are you Adams? Do you have last name Adams? If yes, keep. So that's what this function does. As I said, I don't think it's the easiest way to do filtering. I prefer using a Spark data frame, which I'll show you later, but it's always good to know this. It's actually better from memory on executors to do it this way, but I think it's a bit more convoluted. So you're going to use a lambda function. That's a lambda function in Python, not a lambda function in AWS. So again, if you're not familiar with Python, go read up what a lambda function is. But in terms of this, just type it out. So it's using a lambda function called x. X in this case, we're going to assign it to this record. So we're saying for x, and when we get to last name, so I'm going to type in last name, I want to see if it's in Adams. So AD, and make sure it's capital A as well, or else this won't work. So just to go through this, we're going to load up the dynamic frame customers. We're going to go through each row, which is called X here. I've assigned the row to the variable X. It's going to look at last name inside that row and see if it contains Adams. Last thing we need to do is show the results. So let's just put that out, show the results. And we want that dffilter.show. So it's going to go off. It's going to look at it record by record, dynamic record by dynamic record, and find out where it's equal to Adams. I'll hit run. This will take a few seconds, but it will print out the rows down below that have Adams. So you can see that we have 3 rows that have Adams as the last name. You also notice that last name is now first in the record inside a dynamic data frame to make it easier for us to view. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is actually joining 2 data frames together. Now, it only does an equality join, so it only joins 2 data frames that have the same primary key. If you're not familiar with a join, it's the same inside SQL as an inner join. And what we're going to do is read up the customer's data and read up the orders data. We're going to use the customer ID to join on the customer ID inside the orders table. And what we're going to say is where the customer ID is the same on the customer's dynamic record, join as in show it as one line where the orders also has that ID. So we're going to end up with one big long dynamic record, and that dynamic record is going to have a customer and an orders line joined together where the ID is the same. So just scroll back down to the bottom or to the part in the booklet where we were, which is 11. Now, I know I said we're going to type this all out, but this is quite convoluted to type, and we've already covered it in depth in the presentation. So let's copy number 11, bullet point 1, to make things easy for ourselves. I'm actually going to explain what it's doing, but although I went in depth, this time, same database as we were in before, but it's going to go to the orders table. So if you want to double check that, you can go out onto the AWS Glue console. You can go to databases again. You can then go to the PySpark database that was created by the CloudFormation tutorial. Inside tables, and then we have the orders table. This time you can see the orders table has customer ID in the schema, which we were just looking at on GitHub. We're going to join on the 2 customer IDs between the customer table or the customer dynamic frame and the orders dynamic frame, where they're the same, and end up with one big line for all the orders. So this is how you do a join or an equality join inside PySpark using the AWS Glue libraries for dynamic frames. There are no left or right joins with a dynamic frame. There's only a equality join. If you need a left join, you have to use a Spark DataFrame. Again, I'm going to show you later on in the tutorial how to do that. So don't worry, we'll look at that later in the tutorial, how to do a left join or a right join for that matter. But for a dynamic frame for the Glue libraries, there's only an equality join. So copy and paste that in and then hit run. That's it off and running and actually reading up that data. Oh, that was pretty quick. There you go. Big long lines or big long records of data, as you can see. Next thing we need to do is actually join these two dynamic frames together. So again, comment, and I'm just going to put join dynamic frames. So again, I'm just going to join these two dynamic frames. I'm using the customer's data frame or customer's dynamic frame that I already have in memory, and I'm joining it to that order's dynamic frame I just read up. So I need a name for this. So I'm just going to call this DFY join. So I have something. And then it's actually in a method that we use with the dynamic frame. So you want to grab the customer's dynamic frame name. So dynamic frame customers. Inside or with this method, with this data frame, there is a method called join. So you can actually just hit in a dot and then you hit join. The next thing that you need to do is specify as an array the columns or column in this case that you want to join on. So I'm going to put my two curly brackets there so they're easy to see. So the column I want to join on inside customers is called customer ID. So again, I'm joining on this customer ID to this customer ID. So it's again a string inside square brackets and it's called customer ID. So that's my customers data or dynamic frame sitting here ID. So it's my dynamic frames ID. Then you want to put in a comma after the square bracket and another set of square brackets. Then we need the string that we're going to use for this other dynamic frame. So orders also has customer ID, which is here. So we want to join it on to the other dynamic frame with customer ID also in it. And then what we need is a third comma or a second comma for a third spot. And then you specify the dynamic frame you want to do the join with. So we take that frame and we paste it in. So you can see here that we're using customer ID from this dynamic frame and we're using customer ID from this dynamic frame, and we're saying join the two things together for us. Now, down below, we just want to do a quick show so that is displayed. So just show results as the comment. And then we want to take the DFY join and we want to show the top 20. Once you take that DYF join and we just want to show the top 10 or 20, whatever you fancy. And then that's ready to be run. Hit the play button, off and running. So customer ID joined onto customer ID between the two frames. So we end up with one massive dynamic frame record. Oh, so it got nothing back for some reason, and that's because if you look there, I've spelled that wrong. So it's customer ID. So you don't get an error, it just doesn't join correctly. So look at that, customer ID. Hit the run again, and hopefully this time it will work. There you go. There's one big long dynamic record now from our dynamic frame. You can see that full name has been attached as has first name, and last name is also there. So we use the two customer IDs that are the same. In this case, it's 1845 and 1845. They're equal. So we've created one big long record, and that's how you do an equality join. So the last thing we want to look at actually is how do we write results back down into S3 or into our data catalog. Okay, so back onto the README. First thing we need to do before we actually learn how to write down the S3 is create a location to write down to. So I've gave you the name of the location. Please keep it the same as me, because I've actually, if you're copying and pasting, I've gave you the URL as well that you need. So let's try and keep things the same if you use the same. So I'm just going to copy that. Next thing I need to do is go to S3. So at the top, I'm going to type in S3, and I'm going to right hand click, and then I'm going to open. So I'm opening S3 on a different page. I need to navigate to the S3 bucket we created way back at the beginning, and we enter at the highest level. Next thing you want to do is click create folder, and then you just want to paste in that name from the README. and that section and create the folder. You can see that that folder has now been created, and that's where we're going to actually write down the data using an S3 connection this time. So this is an S3 write directly using AWS Glue and the Glue libraries for PySpark. So back in the Glue Studio, this is quite a long type, so bear with me as we go, or you can copy and paste from 12 if you want. So we're on point 12, and I'm going to show you how to write to S3 using AWS Glue libraries. So again, let's put a wee comment. Write down to S3 using DynamicFrame library. DynamicFrame libs. Okay, so what we do, libs. Okay, so what we do is we take the glue context object that was created way back at the start. So if we go way up to the top, you'll see that there was a glue context object. So we need to take the glue context object because we're going to use that as an entry point to write. So we take the glue context object and we type in write underscore dynamic underscore frame. So we're writing down the dynamic frame. And then we put in another dot so we can access another method. So within glue context, there's write dynamic frame method, and within write dynamic frame method, there is from options. So we're looking the glue context dot write dynamic frame dot from options. Again, I'm just going to put in the two brackets now so they're done. So we have a couple of options or a couple of variables or arguments we need to fill out for the options. So the first thing is we need to know the frame that we want to write down. So it's called frame, and then we hit equals. So what frame, what art frame do we want to write down? We are going to write down the DynamicFrame customers. So I'm just going to scroll up and I'm going to grab the name. So DynamicFrame customers. This is exactly the same data as we had originally. Like right at the start, it's the same data sitting in S3, but I just wanted to keep it simple. So first thing we need to do is write down DynamicFrame customers. The next thing it needs to know is the connection type. So this one is S3. You can also use JDBC, but for this, we're going to use S3. So connection, CONNECTION underscore type, so connection type equals, and then as a string value, it has to be S3. So open up your quotes, put in S3 with a smaller case S, and that's you ready to go. The next thing it needs to know is the connection options. So again, connection, and then underscore, again, options. And this is the S3 path to where we want to write. So connection underscore options, then it wants a JSON. So open up a JSON by the squiggly brackets, and we want to enter a key value per. So the first thing we put in is path, then a colon, so that's the value. So the path is the value, and is the key. Path is the key, and then we need the value. So the value is the S3 location. So you want to type in, or easier maybe to go and copy and paste this S3 location. So if you want to click back, actually, click the tick, and then you want to copy the S3 URL. So copy that S3 URL that we just created and paste it in. So as you can see, I'm running down to this S3 bucket and this folder. So that's the S3 URI. That's what we need. That's what we want to copy down. Next thing we need to specify is the format of that write or the file. So again, you need a comma in there. We want to put in format as a variable argument or an argument. And again, this has to be a string, so it's CSV. So we're just writing down as CSV. Then we need to give it some options of how we want that wrote down. So it's called format underscore options, like that. Then it's equal again, and it's equal to a JSON. So you want to open that curly bracket and close that curly bracket like that. And then we need to put in an argument called separator, SEPARATOR, so separator. And again, this is a key per value. So that's the key, and the per is comma. So format options, separator, comma. You will then need another comma after this because we've got one more argument, and it's called the transformation. This is again just the name, CTX equals, and I'm going to call this data sync 2 for easiness. So there's quite a lot going on there. The first thing we do is we supply the dynamic frame that we want to write down. In this case, it's customers. Next thing we do is supply the connection type, which is S3. The next thing we need to do is supply the connection properties, i.e. the key value pair of where we want to write to, which is the S3 folder we just created. Then we want to supply the format, which is CSV. Then we need to supply the format options, which is a comma separated file. And then this last bit is just giving the whole process a name. That's what that is. There's nothing too complex. And then we want to hit play. So this will take a little second, and if it was successful, we'll get this feedback. Now we can actually go see that file that's been wrote down. So if we go into the S3 bucket again, we click onto it, and this might take a second, and we refresh on the top left, you can see that the file has been wrote. So make sure you refresh. I want to download this and have a look, so I'm just going to right hand click and hit download. And then I'm going to open this up by double clicking. Oh, it's opened up on another screen. So I'll just drag this across for us so we can see it. And you can see that we've been able to write down as a CSV, let's blow this up a little bigger, as a CSV, that file using that connection. Okay, so that's a bit of a long way round just to write down to S3. There is another way that we can write using the Glue data catalog. So the same way we can read up from the Glue data catalog, we can read down using the Glue data catalog. So this is actually point 13 where we're writing down to the data catalog using a dynamic frame. So we're going to write down to the data catalog using a dynamic frame. So let's just put in a comment then, write down to data catalog using DynamicFrame. So just while we're here, let's take a little quick look at the catalog. So if I go to Glue on this S3 tab, and again, if we go to databases, which will be under PySpark database, so databases, then the PySpark one. Takes a little second. Tables, you'll see that the table we're going to write to has already been created. This table has already been created because it was supplied in the CloudFormation template that I wrote. What's not created yet is this folder location. So if we click onto it, it will actually take you there, but it doesn't exist. So customers.write.df does not exist in S3. So if I go back up a level, you'll see that we've got the one that we created called write down DYF to S3. But if I just paste it in there, you'll see that there's no folder called customers write yet. Our Glue job or our Glue code here will actually create that folder using the table. And that's why it's so powerful to keep everything inside the Glue data catalog. Again, plenty of stuff on this channel about AWS Glue and those kind of insights, including that tutorial with the link in the description. So this time there's quite a lot to write out again. So bear with me as we go, but it's good practice to get the syntax on the go. We need that Glue context object again. So again, our entry point is Glue context. So as I mentioned in the presentation, that's our entry point with the Spark context, but with the Glue wrapper. Again, it's the dot, and you guessed it again, it's that write dynamic, every time, dynamic frame option. Then another dot for another method, and rather than from options, same as the read, it's actually from catalog this time. So read from or write down to from the catalog. Let's put in the two curly brackets or the two curve brackets. Hit the wrong button there. Two curve brackets again, so we can so we know what we're doing. So two curve brackets, so our method is closed. Again, we have to supply the frame that we want to write down to, so that's easy. It's the customer's frame again. And then we need to supply the database, like the database we want to write down to. So it's called database, and we hit equals, and this has to be a string. And if we quickly jump back out to the console, you can see that the database here is called PySpark tutorial DB. So I'm just going to copy and paste that in. The other thing it needs is the table name. So that's table, oh, extra space, table underscore name. So we need the table name to write down to, and again that has to be a string. And if you jump back out onto the console, oh, hit the wrong button there, you can see that the table name is customers write DYF. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it in for ease. And again, that's all you need. So using the data catalog that I created these tables in, using CloudFormation for us, I can write straight down using PySpark code and the Glue context object. Again, just hit run. This will take a couple of seconds, bounces this back. If we go into the S3 bucket and I hit refresh, we'll now have a fourth folder, which is this one. And you'll see that again, we've created a new CSV file with the data. If you want to double check that, you can actually then click on here as well, and it will take you to the same location. Although it didn't exist before, it will now actually exist. So it's going there and you can see that it's there. And if you want to see that data, you can just download that data, double click it, and it will open for you locally again. So if I just scroll out of that, bring it across this one, and I open it up big again, you can see that we've used the data catalog to write down. Right, let's take a look at actually a Spark data frame now and the benefits we get from that. So we can actually convert from a dynamic frame to a Spark data frame and take advantage of all the PySpark libraries that are available in Spark. So we're going to move away from that AWS Glue libraries that we've been using this time and move into more kind of Spark oriented languages or methods that you may be more familiar with. So we're going to take a look at a Spark data frame, and we're going to show or see how we can take a dynamic frame, which is a glue concept, and change it into a Spark data frame, which is a general Spark concept. A data frame in Spark is a distributed data structure organized into columns. So this is actually a data frame in Spark on the right hand side. You can see it looks like a relational table in SQL, and that's fundamentally what it is when you look at it from the outside, but how it's handled on the nodes is completely different. It's distributed among many computers. Now, the interesting thing is this is what would come with Spark out of the box. The stuff we've done previous are Glue or AWS libraries, so they're bespoke to AWS. These next set of methods work with Spark no matter what it's running on. So these are core Spark things, Spark libraries. And we're going to try and do the same things we did previously with a wee bit more actually, but using the Spark libraries instead of the AWS Glue libraries with the Glue context. So as you can see, the first thing we're going to do is change it to a data frame. So our dynamic frame can be used to read the data up. And once we have the data up, we can call a method called 2df in it, which again, you can see in the documentation, and that changes it to a Spark data frame. From that point in time, we then have access to all the Spark methods. We're actually working with the Spark data frame, no longer a Glue dynamic frame. So we're taking a dynamic frame, we're changing it to a Spark data frame, and then we're using the Spark methods with it. So let's do that first. First thing we're going to do is actually change our dynamic frame for the customers into a data frame. So if you're following along still on the booklet, we're doing part 15 where we're going to change a dynamic frame into a data frame. One thing I do get asked a lot is why would you not just change it straight to a data frame all the time? And the answer is that a dynamic frame actually uses, or the transformation to a data frame, a Spark data frame, is quite memory intensive. If you can do your transformations in the dynamic frame, it is best practice with Glue to do so. You'll want to use the dynamic frame obviously to read the data up using the libraries we just looked at. If you can then carry out your operations like renaming or filtering, use a dynamic frame. If you can't, or maybe if you're more comfortable, to be honest, and your data is quite small, then use the 2df method to switch it over into a data frame. And actually, sorry, we're on point 14. So we're going to do 14 here, and we're going to change it over into a dynamic, or change it over from a dynamic frame to a data frame. So back onto the Glue console, and it's this little one here we're going to use. So I'm just going to copy that for now. Comment as always, and we're changing from a dynamic frame to a Spark data frame. So we're going from a Glue dynamic frame to a Spark data frame. We need to call this a name, so I'm just going to call it Spark DF, so we know it's a Spark data frame. And then we want to take the dynamic frame.customers, hit the period symbol or the full stop or the point, and it's 2df, so it's 2 in small, df in big, and it's a method, so we have the curly brackets. So we're taking the dynamic frame and changing it to a data frame, and then we just want to show the Spark data frame to make sure it worked. So that is quite simply just Spark, so it's this df, we're just created df dot show. So we're just showing the data frame, and then we go back up and we hit run. This will take a few seconds because, as I said, it's quite memory intensive, but once we have it in the data frame, we're ready to go. So you can see that that's structured. You can see there's a structure around a data frame, and we have access to all the Spark methods. So this is a Spark data frame, and this is a dynamic frame. This is a Glue concept that makes it easier to look at the data, read up the data, and in some cases work with the data. But now we're looking at a pure Spark concept. So with that being said, we're on to point 15. 15 is how to select the columns in Spark. So if you remember, there was the glue way of doing it with the DynamicFrame. So if we just go back up really quickly, and we have a little look, there was the select columns, which was select underscore fields for the dynamic frame, and then you had to do this array stuff, or or now where we are, we're looking at a Spark way of doing it. So you can see that there is a Spark way of doing it. So on the 15, as I said, and let's say the Spark way, so we're just going to select columns, and this is the same columns as before, but different method because now we're using a Spark data frame. So I'm going to call this DataFrame Select, and I'm going to assign it to a variable. Then it's going to be equals. Then it's the Spark data frame, which we called Spark DF. So let's just copy and paste that down for simplicity. Then it is dot select. And again, it looks really like SQL, so I find this easy. Then it's the first column in quotes, so we want the customer ID again, customer ID. And then it's a comma, and the second field we want is called full name, so it's just full name in quotes. Then we want to show, oh, cancel that, hit the wrong button there. Then we want to show, so it's just df then select dot show. So again, still the show method when you're working with a Spark data frame, but you can see how the select is different. We just specify the field names together, and it's no longer select fields, it's just select. So this is a pure Spark method to select two fields that we want, or two columns that we want. So customer ID and full name, and you can see that it's inside a data frame. Excellent. So the next thing that we want to do, add columns together. Couple of different ways to do this inside Spark. So we can add a new column with a string value that's the same the whole way down. And I'm going to show you how to add a column that has a concatenated value between first and last name as well. So one's more in depth than the other. This is a Spark method only. There isn't a way to do this, I don't think, or exactly the same way to do this with the Glue libraries. So we have to convert to that data frame, that Spark data frame, to do this. First thing we actually have to do is import a library. So this is a Spark library that we need. So it's import. Actually, we're just going to put a comment. We need to import the lit library, or lit lib. So bit of a long thing here. So from PySpark dot SQL, so SQL dot functions. So from the PySpark SQL library functions, import lit. So we want to import lit from the PySpark functions library. Okay, then we want to say add new column with literal value, add new column with literal value, and I'm just going to take a couple new lines, and then we want to put in df new column is equal to, and it's the old one called spark.df, so we're just going to be working with that. Again, there is a method called with column, so with and then column with a capital C. Then again, it's the curly brackets, and there's a couple of arguments we need to put in here. We need a column name, so I'm going to call this date, so I'm creating a date column, and I'm going to put in today's date as the other argument. Now, the other argument is a string, but because we're working with SQL functions here inside PySpark, I have to call it lit. So I'm working with this lit function I've just imported, which is literal, so literal string, and I want that literal string to be today's date, which is 2022-07-25. So I'm saying here, create a new column, call it date, and add this literal string value to that date. And then we just want to show column, and it's the new DF, the new data frame, and we want to hit that show. So here I'm creating a literal string, and I am calling the column date, and I'm setting it to that literal string of today's date. Then we want to hit run. This will take a few seconds. So it's going out, it's creating a new column called date, as you can see, and it's creating that literal string from that library we imported the whole way down. Okay, that's kind of interesting, but not really what we do with new columns a lot of the time. You may want to add a date, but more than likely you probably want to combine two columns together, do something of that nature. So we are going to create a new column and add two strings together. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take the first name and last name columns, and we're going to concatenate the two columns together to form our own full name column. So although we already have full name, we can actually check that this works by creating another full name column and adding those two columns together, or concatenating those two columns together. So the first thing we actually need to do is import another function. So from, and if you want to copy and paste it down and be lazy, you're more than welcome. We want to import again from this PySpark SQL functions library. And rather than typing it all out, I'm just going to copy and paste it down. And then we want to import this time a function called concat, which stands for concatenate. So it's going to let us concatenate two columns together, or actually two columns and a literal string together is what we want to do. And then we want to call this df new full name. So we're creating a new data frame. I want to take the old customer data frame again. So again, I'm going to be quite lazy and copy and paste that down. We call it Spark df. And again, we want to create a with column. So same method again, with column, we're creating a new column. And again, we need to give the column a name. So this is new full name, like so. And then what we need to do is actually concatenate the first name and the last name with a space in between. So this isn't the easiest thing to understand or to write out, but if you bear with me, it should be okay. So take a space after the comma and write out concat. So we're using this concat method. Put in a pair of curly brackets or round brackets so we know what we're doing. And then we have to have what we're concatenating together. So we want the first name column. Yep, that's perfect. But what we actually want to concatenate this to is a space and the last name. So we actually have to concatenate a space onto the last name, and then it gets added in. So we need another concat method, and this is where PySpark can get quite difficult to read at times, but we need another concat. And again, put in your two curly brackets there so it's easy to read. Then you're going to need a argument of a literal, and this literal is a space, which looks like that. And again, close the brackets. So lit space, so I've got a space in there, close the brackets, comma, and then you want to add this to last name. Okay, so you should end up with 3 brackets on the right hand side there if you've done this correctly. And I'm just going to run over what we did there again. So we've got a new column and it's called new full name. We're going to concatenate the first name to another concatenation of a space and a last name. And then we need to print that out. So to do that, we're just going to copy that down and we're going to hit show. So that's a new column, and we've also introduced the concatenate method here. So we're learning 2 things at once. We've got the new column, how we name that new column, and then how we can concatenate 2 columns together as well. So again, when you're ready, just hit the play button. Oh, concat, I've spelled that wrong somewhere. There you go. So it's concat, not connect, like that. And you can see that it's giving me a not defined. If I hit run now, that should be us. And you can see that we've created a new full name, and we've took the first name and we've concatenated it to the last name and a space in front. And that introduces you then to the with column and the concatenate functions together. Next, we want to look at dropping columns, and this is actually pretty quick inside PySpark with data frames. I quite like it. So let's jump down. Before we jump down, actually, let's take the name, the Spark DF name again, because we're just going to name it. And then put in and call this drop columns, drop columns. I'm going to call this drop column, so df drop call equals this df, the Spark df, the customer data frame that we've been using this entire time. Then the method's called drop, so you can go look this up in the Spark documentation, but it's called drop. Then we just want to drop the same columns as we did before in the dynamic frame, so first name and last name. So we're just dropping first name and last name from the Spark data frame, which is the customer data frame, and then we just want to show that. So again, it would be df drop call data frame, and I'm just going to take a nice space dot show. And I want to run that, and you can see that it was pretty quick in dropping the 2 columns. So we took the data frame that didn't look like that or that, it looked like this, and we dropped the 2 columns. So that's something new we can do here. It's the dot drop method rather than the drop fails method. And you can see that it looks like SQL. Again, I always think Spark looks really like SQL, so it's easier to use. Now we've dropped the columns. Let's look at renaming the columns. Renaming the columns is number 20. Again, I think renaming the columns here is easier than it is with a DynamicFrame inside Glue. We don't have to do the mappings anymore. This is more memory intensive to do the transfer, but I just think it's easier to do in the long run. So renaming columns. Again, we're going to call this the df rename calls. And then we want to work with that, nope, we want that Spark DF again. So we're wanting the Spark DF. So I want to call it Spark DF, which is our customer DF. We just call it Spark DF. And then there is a method called dot, then with, like that, column, and then renamed. So there's a method with column rename. So you can see there with column rename, capital C, capital R. Need your curved brackets again. You take the name of the column as it currently sits, so we're going to rename the full name column, and then you separate it out with a column, comma, and you put a column, separate it out with a comma, and then you put in the name of what you want to call it now. So it'll rename the full name column to full name underscore new, and I'm just putting in new so it's quicker for us to look at. And I'm going to be lazy this time, and again, just to show you, you can put .show on the end. Once you're ready to go, hit run. And this will rename the column and actually shows it as well. So you can see that the full name column is now gone. And we've got that new full underscore name underscore new column name there. So I do think this is easier, but it does have to be transferred into a Spark data frame. Okay, the next reason we may want to go down the Spark data frame is for grouping and aggregates. So if you jump back on again and you have a look at 21, we're going to do a bit of grouping and aggregate. This is quite common, I think, inside data science and things. So if you're a data scientist or you work with data scientists and they're used to using Pandas data frames, Spark data frames are based on the same stuff. So there's a really small learning curve for them, and that's why I love them so much. So if we look at this, we're just going to group by last name and then count those last names. It's pretty standard kind of group by and count. So we're taking the last names out of the customer table. So again, we've been working with the customer table this entire time. We take that last name column there and we're going to group all the last names that are the same and give me the count of how many there were. So we're going to group on last name and count the number of times they appear. So to do that, it's pretty simple again. We're going to use that Spark DF again, which is the customer DF. There's a function called group by, group and then capital B and Y, and it accepts an argument inside curly brackets of a list of columns that we want to group by, but we're just doing last name. And then we just put count, and that's how it will group by and count the name, the number of them. And then again, just put in that show method at the end so it'll actually print our results to our screen. Simple as that with Spark. So we're grouping by last name. We want the counts of those last names and we want to show them. Pretty simple. And as I said, you should be familiar with it if you're used to working with Python or anything like that, or SQL. Okay, and as you can see, it counted the last names, only showing the top 20 row here, but we had 3 people called Alexander, we had 1 person called Calgary, and so on and so forth. And again, if you're used with SQL or Python data frames, this should be very familiar. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to show that I find very useful is the filtering and where clauses. So we're on to point number 22 here now, so if we scroll down to point 22. If you remember before, there was a filter with the lambda function, or they're using a lambda inside the DynamicFrame. I actually think this is easier. So there's a filter function built in, or there's a where clause. I always use the where clause because I come from a SQL background originally and it's more familiar for me, but there is a filter option. But I think either or are more simplistic than the DataFrame way or the DynamicFrame way of doing it. So let's get this done. So filter on last name. So it's the same again. We're going to filter on that last name Adams, but this time we're using the Spark data frame. So I've copied the one from above. So we want to use that Spark data frame, which is our customer table, and there is a filter method in there. So we're just going to use that filter method, curly brackets, and then we need to take the data frame again. So we're taking the data frame again, and we're saying where the last name inside this data frame, the last name, double equals Adams, so is equal to Adams. Is equal to Adams. Then we're just going to show it. So bit of a convoluted method there if you're looking at it and going, why do we do this? So what you're actually doing is taking the data frame, finding the last name atoms and saying filter where the last name atoms out of this this little method thing going on, or this little query is present in the original data frame. So run that, and as I said, this is my least favorite way to do it, but if someone comes from a Python pandas data frame background, they're probably quite familiar with that. My preferred way is the where clause, so I'm just going to type in where clause as my comment. I always do it this way, personal preference. So again, we have that Spark data frame that we're going to use, and like SQL, it's just where, and that's why I like it. I think it's simple. So a where again. Now this whole thing goes in as a string, so it's last name equals, and then this time we're using, do you see the single quotes here? So 1, 2 single quotes, and that's a string of atoms, and then we just want to close that off and hit dot show. I think that's a lot easier than the filter, but personal preference, that's the way I do it. So where last name equals atoms, and we get the same set of results. Does the same thing. I just prefer that syntax. Let me know what you think in the comments, what way you prefer to do it. Okay, we're on to 23 now in the booklet as it currently sits, and that's joins. So if you remember back, the DynamicFrame did an equality join. Here we can actually do an inner join on atoms only. I just wanted to show you it working like that, and then a left join. You can also do a right join and a cross join. So you have all your SQL joins in here. Just be careful with them. They can get very memory intensive. So the first thing we need to do is read up a orders data set into a Spark data frame. So if you remember before, we had it in a dynamic data frame. We need to get that up and change it to a data frame. So let's just copy that, because again, it's the reading up from the database, except this time, last thing we do is convert to a data frame. So for ease, we're just going to copy and paste that in. So we're creating a data frame called orders, and that's coming from the orders table in the Glue Data Catalog that I showed you previously in the lesson. So nothing new there, except we're using this method at the end to change it into a PySpark data frame. So let's run that. I'll take a few seconds to bring that up. Excellent. So now what we want to do is inner join orders to customers, and don't forget the customers data frame is called the Spark DF because we gave it that name. So we want to inner join that. So we just take the Spark DF, so Spark DF, and again, it has a method called join, so it's as simple as that. Going to put in the curly brackets so we know what's going on. The next thing you need to specify is the second data frame that you want to join on. So in this case, it's df.orders. I always find it easier to copy and paste, but it's personal preference. Then the next thing we do is a comma, and like a SQL join. So if you know a SQL join, I'm just going to put in another comment so you can see it, where you would go select star, lazy, from table A, which in this case is called Spark DF. Spark DF A, inner join, and we were doing orders as B, and then we do on, and then you would have a dot, and in this case we're using the customer ID again, so you'd have a dot customer ID equals b dot customer ID. Well, this follows exactly the same logic. So this is our on clause here, where we are going to join on, except this time you have to give the full data frame name. So Spark data frame dot, and I've already got it copied in, customer ID double equals, and then orders, which, or df, sorry, orders, oh, spelled that wrong again, df orders dot customer ID, then a comma, and the third argument it needs is in quotes, and it needs to know what type of join it's doing, which is an inner. And then we can just put dot show method on the end so it shows it. So you can see how it kind of resembles that SQL method if you're familiar with it in SQL. That's how we do an inner join in PySpark using data frames. So I kind of like it. If I hit play, this will take a few seconds, or run, this will take a few seconds to go off and do its thing. But we'll end up with a data frame that's too big for screen. But we've essentially, as you can see, we've got double lines going on. So this is running this way. And then this is actually then just one big extended line out that it's run room out of. So you can actually see how it goes here. And that's just joining the orders to the customers table or data sets using the customer ID. So that's an inner join. I'm just going to show you something else really quickly so we can actually read the data. If we go on to the booklet, feel free to do this as well if you want, or you can just watch me do it. We're just going to join on the atoms one only. So I'm going to copy this in. So you can see here, actually I'll paste it in and then we can talk about it. You can see here we're creating an atoms data frame with the where clause. So now we're bringing in the where clause to get atoms only, and then we're joining on atoms only to the orders table. So we should only have all the atoms orders this time in the table. There's thousands and thousands of orders in this table in general, but you can see there that ran super quickly and we've got only atoms. So I really like the speed of Spark data frames as well and the caching, and you can see how simple some of the syntax can be. So we've got only the atoms customers into this data frame, and then we're joining that with an inner join here on the orders data frame, and then we get that bounce back almost immediately. And that's what I really like. So that was a really quick one. Let's copy and paste this syntax in as well, because it's pretty much the same syntax and there's no point going over the same thing again typing. So if we paste it in, I'll show you what's happening. This time we're taking the orders on the left hand side and we're doing the dot join again. So that's the same dot join. Same thing again, data frame we want to join to, which is the atoms data frame, which we created up here. And then we're doing customer ID to customer ID, but this time it's a left join. This is going to be massive because it basically will have too much data for it to hold on screen. We're taking the orders table, and then if there is a person called atoms, it's joining, and if not, it leaves it null. So you can see all the ones on my screen here are null. So if we carried on forever, we'd eventually find the atoms join, but that's a left join, and I just wanted to really quickly show it, so that's why I didn't code it out. Okay, so now we're on to the big one, the write downs. So we have a Spark data frame, and I'm just going to jump back on here. We have a Spark data frame, and we want to write down to S3 in the Glue table. So the first thing we need to do is actually delete those two folders out so we can see it happen. So if we go back onto S3, you want to delete this folder, and we want to delete this folder. So this folder and this folder, make sure you leave the other three and hit delete. Do you want to permanently delete these objects? The answer is yes, I do want to permanently delete these objects. Delete the objects. Then go back in and then click refresh once there, and the two folders are gone. So we've got a clean slate to start again, but this time using the PySpark data frame rather than the Glue dynamic frame. Both PySpark methodologies, the two different libraries, two different ways to write down that data. Now here is the kicker. In order to write down, the easiest thing to do is actually take your data frame and convert it to a dynamic data frame, and then the syntax becomes the same. So if you look at our next steps, we've got to import a library. We're taking our customers, which we've called Spark DF, data frame or Spark data frame, and converting that to a dynamic data frame. And that makes it easier to work with. So when I'm writing my ETL code for production, and I do this quite a lot when I need something inside the Spark data frame or my data scientists are working with that, we read it up using a dynamic frame. We convert it to a Spark data frame. We apply the manipulations and the joins in the ETL as a Spark data frame. And then we take that final result set and write it and convert it rather back to a dynamic frame. So we take the Spark data frame and convert it to a dynamic frame, and then use the dynamic frame to write down using its methods, because those methods are Glue methods from AWS and they work with the AWS services. So we get better integrations on our write down. Okay, so let's get this thing converted and let's get this thing wrote down. Back onto the console, back onto the studio. So as I said, the first thing we need to do is import the dynamic frame class to let us convert between a data frame, a Spark data frame, and a dynamic frame. Tricky language to get this around all the time, but we'll get there eventually. So dynamic frame class. So this comes from, as it's an AWS library from AWS Glue. And these are all pre-built libraries that come with Glue for us. Dynamic frame import, and then we want to import the static dynamic frame. Dynamic frame. Okay. Now we want to convert the Spark DF that has our customer data into a dynamic frame. So I'm going to be lazy and put DYF. So you want to take the DynamicFrame method, so which is this one, what we've just imported, DynamicFrame method or object, and then you want to hit dot from df. So from a Spark data frame, we're going to create a dynamic data frame. And it takes a couple of arguments. One is the Spark data frame that we want to convert from. So in this case, Spark df, which is the customers table or customers data. It needs a glue context, which we've already created ages ago. So it's called glue context, that entry point into the method, context. And then it needs a name. So I'm just going to call this convert because it's easy. And then if we want to show that, just to make sure it happened okay, we can go that dot show. And let's run that. So you can see now that the dynamic frame no longer exists in its square form, which I may have open here. Yeah. So it looked like this before, obviously as a Spark data frame, and we've converted that back into dynamic records and a dynamic frame for glue, and that just makes it easier to write. So the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that the next two methods to write down are the same. We actually deleted this folder to get rid of the data, so we need to recreate it. So if we copy that name and go on to our S3 bucket, and we're back where the three folders are, and we want to go create folder, and then we just need to create that folder again. So we deleted that folder to get rid of the data, and now I'm just creating it as a place to write down again. So we can actually use this by copying and pasting. You could, in theory, if you wanted to prove it, go back up to where we originally did this as well, which is here. So again, you can actually use this to write it down. You can see it's exactly the same, except you'd need to change that name there. So for good practice, shall we write it out in full? Let's write it out in full. So back onto the AWS Studio, write it out in full, and this is where there's a lot of text and I get it wrong. But sure, let's do this one, and then we can copy and paste the catalog one. Okay, so we need to write this down, so we're going to write down, and it's this dynamic frame we just created called DYF customers. Write down DYF customers to S3 location. Okay, so we need the glue context object, so it's glue context, and don't forget it's the capital C with a small g. And then we need the write dynamic frame method, and again, every time dynamic spelled wrong. Now it's exactly the same as we did before, so it's from underscore options. Then we need the two curve brackets, and again, I'm just taking a space. First thing it's looking for is the name of the frame. So the frame equals, and again, it's this frame here, DYF customers is what we're looking for. Then it needs the connection type. So it's connection, always gets that blank space in, connection underscore type equals as a string S3. And don't forget those commas after everything. It then needs the connection options. So back up and connection underscore options, which again is equal. Now don't forget this time it was a JSON, and then that JSON had a key value pair, and it was called path, and that's the key, and then the value was our S3 URI. So let's just go grab that. It's this one here. Oh, didn't mean to click into that. You want to hit the tick button and you want to grab the URI. Back on to the notebook, which is over here, and you just want to paste that in. So same as we did before. Then we have next down the format, which is CSV. So format equals string as the argument, CSV, comma. Then we have the format options, so format underscore options, and again it's equal to another JSON. So two curly brackets is what you're looking there. And it takes a key value pair called separator, same as we had before, exactly the same. Separator. And then it's equal to or set as the value to the comma. So we're doing a comma delimited. And then the transformation. This is just the name of the transformation, like our name, transformation CTX equals, and give this the name you want. I'm just going to call this DataSync3. Okay, so that was good practice, but I mean, normally I just copy and paste this. So we're taking the data frame that we created and converted to, or the dynamic frame, sorry, that we created from the data frame above, We're writing that the S3 into that path. And let's hit run. Hopefully I got that all right. I did not. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you know what I forgot? Comma. Shouting about commas and I forget the comma. 9. Run. This will take a little second. And it did something. So we go back in and we go back up. We need to refresh this actually. Into the right. And you can see that at 5:55, we created the file, and just to prove it's right, you can download it again. Let's go to download. I can double click. This is the third one I think I've had open of these. Yep. I'm gonna just scroll out of this a couple, bring this over, and this is what we have created. Brilliant. Okay, so same again, because we have it as the dynamic frame, we can write down using the Glue data catalog. You go back on the Glue Studio. So if you are back on Glue Studio and you look at the last piece that we're going to do, you can see here that you can actually write again using the catalog. So we've came this far, let's write it out by hand. So save data using Glue data catalog. Yep. Okay, this one isn't too bad. And this is why I prefer using the catalog to set up. And again, if you want to know more about the catalog, link in the description below to the other tutorial. So we need the glue context again. Glue context dot write dynamic frame. So that dynamic frame method again to write dynamic frame, but this time instead of from options, it's from catalog. So from catalog again, 2 curved brackets, and then we need to supply the data frame that we want to write. So frame argument is the data frame, and it's this customer's data frame, or dynamic frame rather, that we want to write from. So the frame, the dynamic frame, don't forget the comma. Then we have to put in the database, which is equal to the database inside our Glue data catalog. Do I have it open somewhere? I do. So we're writing down to tables, this table here, this database. So we copy and paste that in. It's the same for you because it's coming from the CloudFormation template. And then it'll want the table underscore name as well. And we put that equal to, and then it's the table name I literally just had open. This name here. And again, exactly the same for you. That's why it's brilliant to use this. Glue data catalog also helps with promotion between environments and different accounts because you can use the same table name and then just promote the code. And then you want to run said code. So that's off writing. It'll take a few seconds and that's it done. So if we go back into that S3 location and we refresh it this time, you've actually got the right there. You can see that there is a file again. And then you want to download that if you want to look at it, but it'll be the same CSV that we've always had. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is actually delete the resources so it doesn't cost us anything. You want to highlight all the stuff inside the S3 bucket and hit delete. It'll ask you, do you want to permanently delete? I'm just going to be lazy and copy and paste permanently delete. Delete the objects. Then you need to go back out to CloudFormation. So Cloud Formation at the top. Our stack is sitting there and we're going to delete that stack. So if you get a few seconds, yep, it'll load and then you want to hit delete. That'll delete the stack. So that's deleting all the resources that we've created. It'll take a few minutes and then it won't cost us any more money. We should be pretty much inside the free tier. Not sure if we'll go outside it. If so, it's a few cents. And as you can see then, we have no stacks left. Congratulations guys on completing the PySpark tutorial. There was quite a lot in that, so feel free to go over anything again that you need as and when. I'd really appreciate a like and subscribe to the channel because it helps me out. Alternatively, you can support me on Buy Me a Coffee. Members appearing on screen now for a shout out. Thanks guys, really appreciate that one. You can also find me at my website, www.johnnychivers.co.uk, link in the description. And until next time guys, thanks for watching.